Hi, my name is Ted Gutierrez, and I have the pleasure of leading every day a team called SecurityGate.io, and we're in the business of optimizing OT risk management practices. One of the things that we do is we always look at frameworks. When we optimize them and break them down into controls and control families, we're always looking at ways to show more insights to our customers. And one of the things that we did with some of the recent news was look at what's the imbalance of a given company when it comes to people, process, and technology. If you take a look at what really gets the attention in the media, we feel bad for these guys. It could happen to any of us, but it's a fallacy for us to talk about technology as the core source of the problem, and we all know that. At the end of the day, this was about people. It was about processes to change passwords, and we should look at this incident as yet another indication that things are not changing. In some ways, they're actually getting worse when it comes to people and process. So when we took a look at the data going all the way back to 2017, not only did we see cyber attacks actually getting bigger and more complex, but we actually saw that people being the centerpiece of them was rising from 70 to 90%. And I know as security practitioners that we know a lot of this, but let's take a look at the data in a different way. If we know that people are the center of our challenges, and that's where we should spend the time, take a look at some of the biggest frameworks that are out there. I chose two just for this conversation, NIST CSF and SOC 2. 70% in NIST CSF and looking at 80% of the controls and the control families for these different frameworks focus on people and process. So that may not be surprising as an individual data point. But when you overlay that data on how much money and the resulting time and budget and people that are spent as a core set of resources on technology versus people, that's when you start really uncovering some maybe opportunities for improvement. It's one of the things that we're going to talk about with a few of my friends today in this panel, and I challenge you to ask yourself, do I have an imbalance of the amount of resources I'm spending on technology, people, and process? And if you don't know the answer, that you challenge yourself to try to figure that out. Let's learn some skills and some tips from that tradecraft with some of my friends here now. Hi there, Mick, Dave. Thanks for joining today. Really
Howdy.
Appreciate you investing the time.
Thanks for having us.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, so love to learn a little bit. Tell us what you do, where you come from, what your experience is, and why don't you tell the crowd a little bit what was interesting about this whole concept of people, process, technology. Mick, you want to start off?
Sure, I'll start off. So my name is Mick Vaughan. I currently work for SecurityGate. My title is subject matter expert. In a previous life, I was the cybersecurity architect for a drilling company, and my responsibility was to secure the OT infrastructure. And as convergence came along, I was also tasked with securing that infrastructure as well. So it's been quite an interesting ride.
Awesome.
And,
Dave?
Like I said, my name is Dave Bang. I'm the manager for business system security for North America. Our responsibility is all of the cybersecurity, digital security for the manufacturing facilities, both the IT and the OT side. My background is IT. I've been doing that since 1993. I moved into security in 2006 and started partnering with the OT side of the house about 2012, trying to bring them into more of a secure environment, and then kind of tried to figure out what the next steps were. And so we created this whole new organization that's outside of both the IT and the OT organization.
I think that's pretty cool. I saw business in the title. I think that's a really good way to look at the challenges, something we're going to cover today. So you've been kind of working on the OT side since 2013.
Yeah, about
and then
that.
when, Mick, did you really jump into the OT world yourself?
I jumped into OT about 2012.
So you guys are like, I guess 7 to 8 years. You've seen the convergence, the divergence, new technologies hitting the market. You guys
Absolutely.
Right.
you've been not new to the game. So, the subject of our discussion is people, process, technology. We think about that triangle of controls, triangles of activities. The question that I struggled with, and we've talked about it before, was how do you measure your people, process, technology strategy? What do you guys think about just the measuring of it, and then finally, how do you make sure that strategy is or is not imbalanced? How do you start that?
Man, that's an interesting question. And that's why we're here.
Right.
I don't think anybody has a definitive answer.
Mm-hmm.
So the best thing I think is to have an approach where you consider your technology, and you do need that. That's the easy thing to point to. You say, yeah, I spent several million on this year, and I got it. But it's harder to point to the people and say, what budget do I need to educate my people? And education of the people is important.
Well, and we saw that, I
drives
mean,
everything.
Not going backwards, but a lot of the media is attracted to the technology side of the house. A lot of the money is aimed at the technology
That's
side
the
of the house.
sexy side.
But I think that people, in my perspective, I mean, people and process are the underpinnings, the foundation of even the correct implementation or maintenance of technology, right? So I'm a big believer on people and process. How do you approach that strategy, Dave?
Well, it like we said, it's difficult to do because it's so hard to measure, right? So you see all kinds of ways people try and measure it, right? They try and measure it based on what percentage of their overall budget is spent on people versus process versus technology. You see some people measure it based solely on head count.
Right.
And for me, it's got to be a combination of that, right? So it's got to be, you got to have the right number of resources to where they're not all focused on any one area. Traditionally, people in the security realms are technical people, right? You don't get a lot of folks in the security roles that come from outside of a technology background.
Right.
So that leans even more towards focusing
grabbing
on
technology first
as their kind of go-to.
Or that they're early adopters in some capacity. They really like the technology. They can see the ROI really clearly on a dashboard. I get that.
Right.
I think another thing that makes it difficult for the people part of that equation is understanding their skill sets. How do you actually measure what skill set they bring to the table? I mean, you see something on a resume and you think...
You're talking about bringing people onto your team?
Absolutely.
Right.
And their
or
capacity...
people that are already on your team, figuring out how their skill set will apply to making this work, making it viable.
Or where their gaps are, and then how do you fill those gaps?
Absolutely.
Right?
And then you got the big question, just from a management perspective, do you want to play to people's strengths, or do you want to round out their total experience by giving them a challenge? You know, we talked about something just before we started was, do you want to run, if you imagine people, process, and technology, just simplified, there's 10 controls we're going to go hit, and there's 10 people on our team. Do you want to put all 10 of them on all 10 as a project list and kind of round out your experience, a little risk management there in case you have some turnover with your people, getting promoted or whatnot? Or do you want to put one on maybe phishing, one of them on this business unit, one of them on this business unit, one of them just to write policies and procedures? How do you know which strategy to implement best? Or is it by choice? Is it just what fits for your organization?
I do think there's a lot of it is what fits for your organization. Right.
Absolutely.
I think that there's good and bad, right, for both approaches. What's worked well for us has been kind of that mixed bag approach.
Right.
To where everybody has some responsibility for technology, everybody has some responsibility for managing maybe not all processes,
right,
but a handful of processes, as well as everybody has responsibility for training and awareness and things like that.
One of the things, Mick, I might steal this because I think this was originally your idea. We had a coffee about this the other day, is that short term, got to get it done, divide and conquer.
Right.
But long term, that's not sustainable. Right? You want to talk a little bit about that idea that you had?
Well, I think I think one of the things that has come up in our organization, and I'm really starting to appreciate more and more, is alignment.
Right.
So we get our ideas out on the table. We have quadrants, that we've defined, we've refined, and I think our team understands, hey, I want to have a quick conversation. Well, this is a quick quadrant one, and I don't want to get too technical about the terms. But what it leads to is an awareness of what everybody's looking at and how this applies to them. How are they aligned with moving this idea forward? That, I think, is a good approach. It's working well for us. And I think we're going to start to see even more dividends from that alignment approach.
I think it's management's responsibility to say, Yeah, I think you get this oh wow moment when you see either an asset inventory solution or an incident response exercise, something that is discovery in nature to help illuminate gaps. People
Right.
tend to have this like freak out moment. And I think it's management's response, and nothing gets done, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I can't tell you how many audits in my past life I would go and do, and then a year later I'd show up. Nothing was really actioned on. And I think
Right.
sometimes people get this blanket of fear that throws over them. Oh, I don't have the resources. Oh, I don't have alignment across OT/IT. Oh, the business units won't talk to me. But
or they've looked at the scope and it's so big they just get analysis paralysis, right?
Absolutely.
yeah,
And
I like that analysis paralysis.
They can't break it down into manageable pieces.
Well, so what was, Dave, you've been in this position, you're obviously pretty successful. You've got a really unique OT/IT connection, right? So how would you tell somebody on your team or somebody maybe that your unit has, the customer, right, the report, whoever you're reporting to, is what is the pitfalls of not focusing on people and process and going just towards maybe that easy vendor solution? That's a
well, it's pretty easy these days because you can point to any breach, any hack, any
majority of them are for people.
the
right?
majority of them have a people component to them.
Yeah.
I mean, for the last 10 years that I've been paying attention to the numbers, it's been in the 90 to 92% of all the breaches have had a people. And when you go in and start doing root cause analysis on, the actual incident that happened, there generally was a people failure and a process failure. The technology either works or it doesn't work.
It's how you take that
It's how you're using it, how you're maintaining it, how you're configuring it, how you're testing it.
I think both of you would agree that in some cases, whether a company is relatively immature in their processes and they go and buy a really complex solution, put it in place, close their eyes, go to bed at night, right? That happens. We know that.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also, you don't find the inverse of that, which is, we're probably not going to spend as much budget on highly complex tools, but we are going to train our people and develop processes that are so tight. It's almost like a back to basics approach. Have you seen that work even in a microcosm, and that can that scale? Can it not scale? Is it possible? I don't know.
It does work, and you can learn to scale it. And I think the sooner the industry figures that out, I think the safer we'll all be, because these things tend to daisy chain. Somebody over here gets attacked and information is exfiltrated.
Oh, we're seeing that. We're seeing that right now in the news.
So then this guy got attacked and somebody else was asleep and really didn't have anything to do with the primary attack. But now you're open. So yeah, I think we need to learn to scale the people. We need to learn to train our people, and we need to figure out what really does work. There's some individualization for corporations, but I think that needs to happen.
I think that maybe we can go to places where they specialize in people and processes to manage their business, right? So if I look at accounting, or I look at disbursements, or I look at procurement,
right,
and I look at the layers of checks and balances that they've put into their processes, the amount of time that they put into training their people to follow processes and things like that.
Or maybe even HR.
Yeah, HR is another great example,
like
right?
When HR is done right, other things tend to blossom in my perspective.
Right.
And when it's not done right, so you're saying one place that you could look if you are in doubt if your people and processes are adequate is to try to mimic or do a gap assessment of your people and process comparatively to a department in your company that you think is getting it right.
Right. Yeah,
That's
always find what does good look like, and then go do that.
Something that worked in the previous oil company is that learning and development was a part of HR. So you hit on something important. If HR is driving learning and development, and we understand that here are the processes, now we need to make sure that our people understand these processes. Learning and development is an integral
Well, I think
part.
it ties back to cyber is people, right? Cyber is business. Cyber is a fundamental aspect of, even more so now in COVID.
Right.
Everything transforming digitally. If one way that you can reach maybe a little bit more balanced PPT approach is use the tool you said, Dave, and then also, Mick, what you said is evaluate people on not so much how many times did I get phished and how many times did I click that. I think there's some value there.
Right.
But I also think that doesn't tell the whole picture. I think it's got to be, you can teach them, you can swat some hands, you can have some remedial training, but if they don't really at their core understand the impact of making a mistake in the larger scheme, I mean, to me, that comes down to culture and your strategy as a company as a whole.
Right.
So if I may steal the mic just for 5 more seconds, so how does that apply to major facility owning, asset owning companies, highly distributed network systems? When we talk about critical infrastructure, we already have a challenge with, these are the IT offices, these are the high rises, and then this is the hard hat area. So if we're talking about all these skills, how do we, it sounds like it's making it even more complex when you start going into an OT environment.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And you end up with a not only a cultural divide, but in many cases a vocabulary divide.
Yeah, the syntax. Yeah.
Right. That they don't, they have the same acronyms for different things, and when one person uses a word, it's used differently.
When in
somewhere
doubt,
else.
just make an acronym.
Right.
And you're probably
Exactly
going to get it trained up fast.
So what I thought was unique about our approach when we created this new organization is we took it out of the corporate office, right? So everybody in the BSS organization, from me down to all the individual folks, reside out at one of our manufacturing facilities.
You reside there. That's where your
That's
office is.
That's where my office. Well, I mean, my office is in my downstairs den right now, but
we can remember fonder times when we actually left our, I go into the closet. That's the only place
I started out at one of our chemical plants, right, and I got moved 20 years ago to our corporate offices, and a year ago moved back out to one of the chemical plants.
Right.
And all of the folks on our team reside at one of the plants globally.
Wow.
And we feel like that was a huge thing needed, so that you're there, you're talking to people. So the concept of having a center-led organization that's remotely placed, I think is one of the things that's helping us get over.
Well, not just remotely, but even at the facilities. I mean, you are part of the conversation. You're part of the safety meetings. You're part of the roll call, if you will.
Right.
That's
there in the hallway. I can't tell you the first 6 weeks I was out there, the number of people that just stopped by my office and said, "Hey, you're an IT, right?" And kinda. Sure. What's your question? Maybe I can help.
Yeah. That's good. It's I think it comes down to high level strategy. It's like, where do we want cybersecurity to really be? Do we want it into there's no doubt. I think many people would agree that IT is traditionally just a cost center. And it's, how much money is it costing this month? If you look at
it's hard to articulate value
if you're not there.
If you're not there.
If you're not there making a difference. And I think that, that is where I think people talk about OT and IT convergence. To me, that doesn't tell me much. What I think, I heard this, so it's not my original speak, but how do you transition the activities of a cybersecurity office from being a cost center where we pull money just to do whatever we have to a value center, right? And how do we create that value for operations? Well, you bring up a good point. Office there, that's a start, right?
It sounds to me like you're talking about collaboration, pure and simple.
Right.
Learning to collaborate.
I think so too.
So we, as what we call the process control domain team, which everybody's like, what the heck is that? We had to learn to go to the drill ships and learn to interact with the OT people.
Right.
Learn to listen to the campfire stories.
And they had to learn too, right?
Learn that we're not here. We're here to make sure that you are safe. We're not here to slap your hand.
Right.
Tell us your stories. Tell us what's going on. Let's collaborate. And that makes people work better.
Well, I think speaking to, sorry about that. I think speaking to people in a language that they understand, right? They understand safety.
Right.
They understand risk.
Right.
They understand mitigating controls.
Which none of that we understood.
Non-productive time.
Right. Exactly. Time on tools.
Yeah, right.
They understand all that.
And you get to learn all that from them.
Well, your job, and where I like kind of the business word in that department is translating what might be a really misunderstood cyber-focused technology data point and translating into those words, those things, that's what they need. It's a two-way street. Somebody once told me that there's, I don't know, 20 or 50 words in any industry. And if you say them at the right time, you can gain a lot of credibility. And I think that's what you're saying, is that knowing when to say that, knowing how to say that, gives you knowing what it means, that vocabulary
using
matters.
it intelligently.
Right.
Yeah, using it intelligently. I think it's something I personally believe in. So when we talk about kind of back to people and process technology, I'm going to throw a zinger here. I think the numbers are somewhere around 75% for your average framework that exists. We could talk CISSP, we could talk SOC 2, we could talk compliance, we could talk maturity. But generally speaking, 3/4 of the control families and the subcontrols within that are focused on people and process. Is that adequate? If we're spending far less time, and we know we're spending a lot less time on those, why do they need to be in there? Or is it because, or do we accept that we're not focusing on them enough? How would you challenge the way frameworks are being built?
Well,
I know that's a loaded question.
it is loaded. Sounds like we're challenging the industry right now.
Well, I would challenge the industry. I would say that maybe instead of just having the core controls, there's a secondary evaluation just for people, just for process. I'm simply stating that 75% of the controls in, say, NIST CSF are people process. I think it's a great framework. I think it's a great starting point. I think you can accelerate through it. It has a lot of complexity to it. But a huge amount of the budgets are allocated towards technology. So does that mean that technology implementation is more expensive because it's harder to do and that can't be replicated by people? And is there a mismatch? Here's a better question. Is there a mismatch between how we're allocating our budgets, which is really resources, because with money comes time and people.
Right.
Are we mismanaging our resources as it applies to what is viewed important by the framework? Is there a mismatch there? Or is it on a case-by-case basis?
No, I definitely think there is a mismatch there. We talked about a little bit earlier, right, about how much easier it is to implement a technology, right? Because it's either on or it's off, right? And you can point to it, you can see the little blinky lights, and say that thing is there, we're safe,
and we're getting data from it,
and we're getting data from it, so therefore we must be getting value from it, right? It's much harder to say what's the value are you getting from people or what's the value you're getting from processes, because if things are working correctly in the way you don't see anything.
Right.
It's only when things break down and that you identify them, but you don't really know whether you're doing things best if you're not seeing something, because are you not seeing something because it's not there, or you're not seeing something because something's covering it up.
Right.
So it's really about data flow, and the perceived ROI or value from that data is where the mismatch is.
Right.
Okay.
And you talked about resources, resources and money. I think it's a combination because they're obviously tied together, right? But again, I think people understand if you buy a technology, the technology doesn't produce value. You've got to have somebody running that technology. So again, if you look at the spread of where your resources are put out in most places that I've worked at and that I've talked to, you have a lot of people focused on technology and not a lot of people focused on people and processes.
And we have to wait for some sort of breach to recognize that in most cases. I mean,
never let a good crisis go to waste.
Right. That's
right.
I
think so. Right.
Always in arrears.
Yeah, it's a rear view mirror approach, and that's not saying anybody isn't trying hard. We see it as an imbalance. When I looked at the numbers, I said, this is odd. There's got to be something here. I think you bring up a good point, though, is that as an industry, we all know since, well, you even stated for the past 10 years, it's just where people are involved in the root cause of maybe what a technology could or couldn't pick up. It continues to grow. So, I don't know if it's just a back to basics approach, and there's so many people in leadership positions that have to understand cyber as a business problem, and we have to start looking at HR departments and things like that, or if it really is that there's maybe an imbalance in technology offerings versus solutions out there that really focus on people and process. I mean, there's just not that many of them, right?
No, I mean, if you look at, if you walk into any conference vendor floor and you look at how many they're there selling a technology versus how many that are there selling a service, that's either a training service or an awareness service or a process service.
Nobody got excited about a process builder,
right?
SaaS,
cool.
right?
It's not a cool booth.
It's my next endeavor. It's the coolest process machine ever. Throw in a few words, but then you get into a problem. I mean, scalability wise, processes. I mean, I've seen a lot of technologies that will help build a process. Not knocking them. I think it's a great tool. But man, if your process is not aligned with a business impact analysis, which is aligned with the right people and scope, every one of them should be different, don't you think?
Yeah.
I mean, in most cases. So it's hard to tackle that, right?
Right. And I think that's the other thing is people like to think that if we put the time and effort into doing process stuff, we'll end up with one process that everybody uses and it's exactly the same globally.
That's it's a fallacy.
It's a fallacy. Yeah. It's a pipe dream, right?
Yeah. Which then it's like,
everywhere.
I love being the guy that's like, so I have to write this policy. How wide can I make this policy? Because I don't want to write 15 of them. Right?
You want to catch everything in one.
Well, I think we're a little short on time, guys. What I would like, what would you challenge the audience to think about based on your experience as it relates to people, process, and technology? All of us have this on our shoulders. We can go back and do some analysis, but from your own experience, what would you guide the audience to think about?
I would like to challenge them to find a way to collaborate that works for your organization, get on the same page, learn what your coworkers' language is, let them learn your language, and let's see if we can move this forward.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I would say, look at where you're spending your resources, and specifically where you're spending your people resources, and see, are you getting the value from them that you think you're getting from them, right? Or is there a better way to spend those same resources to get better value by focusing on something other than technology?
Well, I appreciate that, guys. Well, appreciate the investment of time. I know the community does. People, process, technology. That's the focus for today's discussion. There's no right or wrong when it comes to evaluating your business. We've got these key practitioners here that have told us a couple of keys to success. I appreciate it, Dave. I appreciate it, Mick.
Thanks for having me.
I challenge
Happy to be here.
Everybody in the IT and OT community to try to add one more data point, one more lesson learned. Something that's working at one energy company should be shared with the other. And I think that if we learn from each other in that capacity, maybe in the next 10 to 20 years, we'll figure out this PPT thing.
Well, it's a journey, right?
It is a journey.
It is a journey.
We won't make any progress if we don't talk about it.
No, I appreciate that, and I appreciate y'all's willingness to talk about it today. Cheers, and have a wonderful afternoon and morning.
Great.
Thanks.
Cheers.